In 1973, researchers Herbert Simon and William Chase sat three chess players down in a lab: a beginner, a club player, and a grandmaster. Each looked at a real chess position taken from an actual game for exactly 5 seconds. Then the board was cleared and each had to rebuild it from memory. The beginner barely got a handful of pieces right. The club player did noticeably better. The grandmaster reconstructed almost the entire board as if he'd simply photographed it. On its own, that's not surprising. Of course, the grandmaster remembered more. He'd spent a decade studying the game. Most people would stop there. Simon and Chase didn't. They ran the same test again. Same players, same 5 seconds. Except this time the pieces weren't from a real game. They were scattered at random. No opening, no strategy, nothing a serious player would recognize. The players studied it, the board was cleared, and they tried again. The grandmaster's advantage simply vanished. His score collapsed to almost the beginner's level. That shouldn't happen if grandmasters simply had superior memory. So what was going on? The answer traced back further than 1973. In 1946, Dutch psychologist and chess master Adriaan de Groot had already noticed strong players seemed to see a position differently without a clean way to prove it. Simon and Chase's randomized board trick was the missing piece. Grandmasters weren't storing more raw information. They were encoding it in a completely different unit. The mechanism is something your brain already does when you read. You don't process a sentence letter by letter. It recognizes whole words, even whole phrases, as single chunks, without you noticing the compression. A grandmaster's brain does the identical trick with a chessboard. A beginner sees 32 separate objects scattered on 64 squares. A grandmaster sees a crumbling pawn structure, an exposed king, a rook poised on an open file, 4 or 5 meaningful chunks, not 32 disconnected pieces. Cognitive psychologists already had a name for this limit. George Miller's famous 1956 paper described short-term memory as holding roughly 7 items, give or take 2. Chunking is how a grandmaster fits a whole battlefield into that same narrow window. Scramble the board, and none of those chunks exist. The grandmaster is suddenly forced to memorize 32 isolated objects one at a time, like everybody else, and the advantage disappears. That discovery reframed expertise itself. But it also opened a much bigger question. If years of chess reshape how someone perceives a board, does that change stay locked inside the game, or does it leak into everyday thinking? The most striking answer came out of a classroom, not a lab. During the 1980s, Venezuela ran one of the largest applied experiments on cognition ever attempted at national scale, teaching chess to tens of thousands of schoolchildren as part of a broader government initiative to improve reasoning skills nationwide. Researchers expected exactly one outcome: better chess players. What they measured instead was a jump in logical reasoning, general problem-solving, and mathematics performance that had nothing to do with chess notation. Whatever chess was training clearly wasn't staying on the 64 squares, which raised an oddly literal question: how do 64 squares physically rewire a brain? Answering that meant scientists had to stop watching chessboards and start watching brains directly. For most of the 20th century, the working assumption was that the adult brain was essentially fixed hardware. You could load new facts into it, but its physical structure was locked in by adulthood. Modern brain imaging changed that. Researchers comparing experienced players against non-players found measurable differences in the regions responsible for pattern recognition, forward planning, and decision-making under time pressure. Differences consistent with neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to physically reorganize itself through repeated demanding practice. Every single game forces a player to weigh a position, imagine a move, predict a response, discard one idea, and test another dozens of times in an hour. And each of those micro-decisions is a small rep for the exact circuitry doing the work. But arguably the most important change chess produces isn't something a brain scanner picked up at all. It's something almost every serious player discovers the hard way, at the board. You spend 15 minutes calculating what you're sure is the perfect move, you play it, and almost instantly you spot the blunders sitting right there in the position you just created. There's no time to sit with that feeling. The clock is running and your opponent isn't going to pause so you can recover emotionally. Strong players develop a skill that has nothing to do with chess theory at all, the ability to fully release the move that just went wrong and put complete attention on the one move that's actually in front of them. That habit doesn't stay on the board either. It's the same skill that determines what happens the moment a real plan collapses, a real mistake lands, or a day goes sideways. The difference between spiraling on what already happened and redirecting cleanly toward what's still within your control. When Chase and Simon sat down with 3 chess players in 1973, they thought they were studying memory. What they actually uncovered was a demonstration that expertise isn't a better brain. It's the same brain, restructured by a very specific kind of repeated practice. That process was never a single dramatic leap. It happened one position at a time, one recovered blunder at a time, until eventually chess had quietly rewritten not just how someone played the game, but how they processed problems that had nothing to do with a chessboard at all. What's the biggest thing a game or skill you practice has taught you that had nothing to do with winning?